The criticism by Abdul Malik Juwayni, who is the author of Ghiyath al-Umam. This is a book also on government, where he talks mostly about the absence of government and these borderline situations and exceptions and what to do with them. There's a famous criticism by Juwayni of what Mawardi has been doing. And people have been puzzled because the criticism is very quick, but it's ultimately the fact that Mawardi piles up a lot of information and doesn't really give a clear theory of government. So, for example, when he talks about whether Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, the people who bind and loose, have to be consulted even in the time when an imam is giving an act of succession or a new contract to a new governor to succeed them, whether the people who bind and loose need to be consulted or not. He says, well, we get from some authors that this issue of reviewing the matter with the people who bind and loose is a question that takes disagreement, that there's a disagreement in that. And he said, assuming that this is something like the mudmunat, or the matters that can be matters of opinion. But in fact, no, there is no disagreement, because this point is so essential and so basic. And then he complains. He says, وَالشَّكْوَى إِلَى اللَّهِ ثُمَّ إِلَى كُلِّ مُحَصِّلٍ مُمَيِّزٍ مِنْ تَصَانِيفَ أَلَّفَهَا مرموق متضمنها ترتيب وتبويب ونقل أعيان كلام المهرة الماضي. So I am complaining, he says, to God and to every scholar who knows the good from the bad, complaining about the writings of this very famous scholar. He doesn't mention the name, but later indicates that it is a book that's known as the Ordinances of Government or Governance. And he says, yeah, this guy's so famous, and all that he does is really reconcile, classifies material, but at the end, there is a lot of walking in the dark, you could say. خَبْطٍ كَثِيرٍ فِي النَّقْلِ. Sometimes he even misquotes, and he doesn't do a good job. Now, that's too excessive criticism. But the point that we could accept, reading Mawardi also neutrally, is that he again says, وإنما جر هذه الشكاية نظري في كتاب لبعض المتأخرين مترجم بالأحكام السلطانية. At that time, Juwayni may have been in his teens or 20s when Al-Ahkam Sultaniya came out. He himself was to live about 25 years later. No, so he was in his 20s when this book came out. And Mawardi, of course, died the same year the book was published, because he himself didn't publish it. It was a posthumous publication. So when he looked at the book, he may have been in his 20s. He says, مشتمل على حكاية المذاهب ورواية الآراء والمطالب. So there's a lot of quoting and mentioning of the opinions and so on. But he says, without much distinguishing, من غير دراية وهداية, without understanding, without guidance, وتشوف إلى مدرك غاية, without having a clear aim at the end of the day. So I guess if we take Juwayni's assessment on our scale of whether Mawardi was essentially just a formalist and a realist, we could also add the assessment here of Mawardi as a non-normative writer, right? That he is a descriptive writer, something of a political scientist, in the sense of quoting the opinions of all political theorists and political scientists before, without having his own theory. He goes on, وتطلع إلى مسلك مفضٍ إلى نهاية. The guy basically has no goal. وإنما مضمون الكتاب نقل مقالات. This is very harsh. I mean, he shouldn't have done that, but he may be right partly that there's a lot of quoting. There is a lot of data. It's a data dump. And he says that the worst thing, وشر ما فيه وهو الأمر المعضل أو المعضل الذي يعصر تلافيه سياقه المضمون والمعلوم على منهاجه. He gets at something that's very questionable or raising a lot of doubt with the material that is certain and known, and that leads to confusion. This is an important note that we will go back to when we look at Juwayni's method and how after talking about the ideal situation of the government, he adds this inquiry as to what happens when we don't get what we want.